Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. It's Football at 4.
And Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Jeff Mosher and this man, Adam Caplan, is in the house today. We're going to take a look at the Eagles on the offensive side of the ball. Free agency, 7 players. We'll do the defense on Friday, but we'll take a little closer look at what the Eagles have to deal with on offense, because everyone's focusing on that defensive side of the ball, but we're going to look at the offensive side of the ball where they have 7 free agents and some interesting names. How can they replace them? And we'll get into that now with Adam Caplan here on the Sports Bash Live 97.3 ESPN from the Inside the Birds podcast. What's up, Adam?
Mike, good to talk to you. Yeah, so 7 on offense, 12 on defense, 1 special team. So you had 20 in all. I can't remember the last time the Eagles had so many free agents. Not exactly a lot of key free agents, but enough that it's causing people some angst. There's no doubt about it. So, yeah, offensively, Mike, we'll get started at quarterback. Gardner Minshew was obviously the number 2 quarterback. Ian Book was the 3. They like Ian Book. I'm not saying he'll be competing for the number 2 job. I just know that they like him, and that's why they decided not to cut him. If you recall, when they were bringing some guys off IR, a lot of people were speculating that maybe they would cut Ian Book, but no, that they did not consider that, and they want to try to develop him down the road potentially as a number 2. But so what if Minshew doesn't resign? Well, this is the first year in a long time. They're actually, and I caution when I say this, I'm not saying they're great quarterbacks, but in terms of experience or decent backup quarterbacks, supply is going to outlive demand. So here are the guys, if they don't re-sign Minshew, here are the guys they could potentially target. Teddy Bridgewater, Mike White, who I actually like a lot, Jacoby Brissett, Joe Flacco, former Eagle, believe it or not, for a short spell, Baker Mayfield, Andy Dolan, Sam Darnold, Case Keenum, Taylor Heineke. His contract's up. They already met Washington, by the way, is already committed to Sam Howell, believe it or not, as their starter. It was a 5th-round pick last season. Cooper Rush, who did a nice job filling in for Dak Prescott, except against the Eagles. Nick Mullins, another former Eagle for a short spell. Blaine Gabbert, Drew Lock, Mason Rudolph, Jarrett Stidham, the one big game. And Josh Dobbs, in that huge Thursday night game against the Jaguars, actually played pretty well. He came off the Lions practice squad and was only there a week and did a good job. So it's not a big deal if Minshew does not resign. I'm sure the Eagles would like to have him back, but if they don't bring him back, Mike, it's not a big deal because there are a lot of decent backup quarterbacks out there.
Yeah, we just know how much they value the backup quarterback position, right? That is something. And Minshew was a veteran who started and made less than $1 million. I mean, in years past, look, this same regime paid Chase Daniels like $8 million to be the backup.
I remember that one. That because Doug Peterson wanted him badly because he knew the offense that he wanted to run. They were together with Kansas City in 2016, and yeah, in fact, that was like, believe it or not, that was like the first guy that Peterson wanted. He told Roseman. Obviously, he didn't look very good, and that was the strangeness of, if you recall, they didn't really want to play Wentz in year 1. Darnold, Bradford. We forgot Bradford gets hurt, right? Well, actually, no. Teddy Bridgewater gets hurt. Excuse me. Teddy Bridgewater gets hurt with the Vikings. Right. And they scrapped their plans. And I remember I was at ESPN then. I reported that the Eagles are surprising. No, it doesn't look like a surprise now. It's preposterous for me to say this, but they leapfrogged Chase Daniel to go to Wentz. If you recall, they made that decision within like 48 hours. They just made a decision. Hey, we saw enough. He did well in that Tampa Bay game a little bit. He got hurt in that game, broke his ribs. He showed he could handle the injury, and then he played great. And apparently against the Colts, did well in warm-ups, and they made that decision. So you're right, Mike. This organization, they put a lot of stock in backup quarterbacks. I mean, Nick Foles. I mean, does it get any better than that? I mean, you're right. You make a great point. You don't want to dismiss the value of it, but the good thing is this is the first year in a long time. There are a lot of guys out there, and they'll be able to get a decent backup.
Yeah, the other one is running back, and I think we all imagine that Miles Sanders. Now, look at Sanders. There's a lot of good running backs on the market. So what kind of value does Sanders have on the market? This should be interesting, but we would imagine that Sanders will not be back. So if he's not back, then what?
I'm not going to roll it out because here's one thing. We haven't talked about this enough. Let's not forget. Sanders was a primary first and second down back this season. He was no longer going to play much on third down. Kenny Gainwell took that role. So from the Eagles standpoint, obviously they're not going to pay him 12 to 14 million, which Barkley could get 15 million, let's say, because the Nick Chubb and Derrick Henry deals were in the low 12s. So Barkley could be anywhere from 13 to 15 million. Josh Jacobs too, potentially. I know the Raiders have some interest in bringing him back, but when you look at the guys who are going to be off limits for the Eagles, Barkley is probably going to come back. The Raiders have interest in bringing Jacobs back, but I don't see the Eagles spending money anyway if he became free. David Montgomery, we know the Eagles liked him for that 2019 draft. He's had injury history. I don't see it. I don't see them overpaying for David Montgomery. And Tony Pollard, the Cowboys will not let him roll. So when you really look at it, Mike, here are the guys, if they don't bring Sanders back, as we've noted on several, actually like more than a month now, the Eagles really want to take a look at Trey Sermon. In addition to obviously Gainwell being a third down back. And don't forget Boston Scott's up, but they need one more back. The kind of guys they could play in a complementary role that could be in a primary first or second down back or be in the mix to be one. Devin Singletary, the Bills, who's a decent player. I know the coaches really love him in Buffalo. Rashad Penny. Now, Rashad Penny, super explosive, former first-round pick for Seattle. Unfortunately, major injury history. They wanted him to be in a two-man backfield with Kenneth Walker, and then Penny got hurt again, and that ended the season. He got hurt early. This guy's the best of the group. Now, I imagine the Patriots would have interest in bringing back Damian Harris, but he's really mostly a first and second down back, grinder type, good football player. He's been a little bit better than most people expect to come out of Alabama. Another guy that would potentially be available. I don't see Kareem Hunt being re-signed. They did not try to extend his contract. We reported at the trade deadline the Eagles were engaged with the Browns to try to potentially acquire him. They wound up not doing so. Probably a good thing they didn't, because Gainwell kind of took charge of that third down role. But he would be perfect complement to the backs that they have there. Jeff Wilson, who I really like, who came over from the trade for the Niners, is more of a zone runner, though. You got to run a specific scheme for him to do well. Jamal Williams had a ridiculous year, 17 rushing touchdowns. He also and he would be a guy that you could grind carries on first or second down. Now, my favorite name out of the group won't cost you very much money. Alexander Madison, who is the backup. He's the backup running back, as we know, for Dalvin Cook with the Vikings contracts up. Good football player, and he could play in third down. He's got good to be a goal line guy. I would love it. I don't know that the Eagles are interested. We'll know more next week, the Combine, but he would be a great fit. Deontay Foreman, who had a big season for the Panthers. Again, a first and second down back. Raheem Mostert, who was Chip Kelly's guy. He's 30 now. A lot of injuries. Excellent special teams player. Super explosive. I don't see it, but the guys that I would keep an eye on would be maybe a Singletary, a Madison, somebody like that, and maybe Kareem Hunt. We'll learn more next week and the week after.
Yeah.
But again, if they got involved with any of these backs, they're primarily going to be first and second down, and that lowers their asking price.
Well, and a lot of the names you brought, I mean, Hunt would obviously, I think, excite people. I like Madison, too. Jamal Williams is a nice name in there. Wilson has been interesting with Miami, San Francisco before that. There are some interesting names there that you would get possibly on the cheap. And then there's the real cheap. You got Boston Scott with the team. Look at maybe a Boston Scott, Kenny Gainwell, Trey Sermon trio.
I don't think they would go to training camp, Mike, whether it's the draft or free agency. I just don't think they would go into training camp. In fact, I would surprise me if they went into training camp without a guy who could be the lead back. I don't see them having a committee down. It's just not good enough. They need a lead back. None of them could be a lead back. Sermon thought he was going to be, talking to the Niners about him when it happened, when they cut him, and he just didn't take charge of the job. And Elijah Mitchell took the job. He was the big surprise as a rookie last year with the Niners. So, no, I think they would add it back. Now, could they bring Boston Scott back cheaply? Absolutely, there's nothing wrong with bringing four backs to training camp because, look, they had four on the roster this season.
Yeah, he's a guy that, I don't know, whenever he's been asked to play, he has produced Boston Scott. But probably not, right, an every down guy. We don't know what they think of Gainwell. You probably have more insight on that. Do they look at Gainwell as a guy who can have a bigger role next year?
We thought, and we were all wrong, myself, Mosher, Greg Cosell. Greg loved him more than we did, but we'll definitely admit we thought he had a bigger role. He didn't have the role that we thought until late in the season. I know, here's what happened, Mike. He did not have a very good training camp. I happened to be there at training camp the day in Cleveland when he was told to get off the field where he had two mental errors. He just did not have a good summer. Wildly inconsistent to be kind, and it took him a while to get going. But no, they love him. I don't see him more than 8 to 10 touches per game. That's the problem with him. he's not small, like he is around 200 pounds, but he doesn't play bigger than that, and he just doesn't. He's not a guy projects, Mike, to answer your question, to have potential of 14 to 16 carries per game or touches per game. He's not that guy.
All right, Adam Caplan from InsideTheBirds.com and the Inside the Birds podcast, looking at the offseason for the offensive side of the ball. Zach Pascal, guy that many people would say, well, he didn't do much, but do we need to maybe look at upgrading that number 3 wide receiver spot?
All right, so Mike, we talked about this on our show that dropped on Monday. First of all, Quez Watkins has got to do a better job. I understand he had a moderate shoulder separation, but he was a disappointment. He's not a consistent football player. That's why he lost. He eventually lost. He started as the number 3 receiver, but he got demoted to the 4, and he wasn't even making shot plays. So Zach Pascal, here's what he does. He'll block. He's outstanding for the run game. Locker room guy. Obviously, we all know that he was Sirianni's guy. That's why Pascal signed in Philly on a 1-year deal for reasonable money. Now, what we also mentioned on our Monday show is we do wonder, will Shane Steichen bring him back to Indy, where he came from? Well, because you want a guy. A lot of these coaches, Mike, they all do this. Andy Reid did it with Jeff Thomason. You might remember him, and Tim Houck coming from Green Bay. They always want their guys. Maybe it's one guy, maybe it's 4 guys, but I would have to think one of the and Gannon also. You would think that one of these 2 guys will, if not both, will try to bring him in, and then we'll see how loyal he is and how much money how much money is he worth. I mean, you can't be paying this guy $5 million a year, but I know he's not fast, but he's 6'1.5". He was a red zone guy, by the way, for the Colts. He's just a valuable guy. I know his production isn't there, as you mentioned, but what he does is sort of the intangibles that's not easy to replace.
Yeah, and obviously, as you mentioned, Watkins was very inconsistent. So if it's not Pascal and Watkins is back, he's got a contract, they might need to bring in another guy then to try to kind of challenge Quez Watkins. But, there's probably not a guy out there that really is that 3rd wide receiver that kind of fits the mold for this team right now.
Yeah, I'm not. And if Pascal could play inside or outside, there are a ton of journeyman types in free agency, but there's not that one tough guy that just is a locker room guy and we'll have more in this in about a week. I mean, DeMarcus Robinson's kind of nephew of Marcus Robinson. You might remember him, veteran receiver, played for the Vikings amongst other teams. I'm looking at my list here. I don't see that guy. Now again, is there one thing we're going to look into? Is there a connection with these receivers that are out there? About 40 to 50 free agent receivers. Are there any connections to these coaches? That's what typically happens for backup receivers. There's usually some connection. Somebody coached this guy or was with him at a particular team. We'll look into that, but no one who comes to mind right now.
All right. Another guy is Andre Dillard. It seems like he's a guy that most people wouldn't care about. I would imagine it wouldn't hurt this team to lose him as much as this guy's probably going to make some money on the market. I would imagine someone's going to say that guy's going to start for our team. But, hey, he's had to get thrown into duty because of a lot of injuries over the years. So you're losing a pretty decent depth piece, but I would imagine they're not going to make much of an effort to keep him.
Yeah, look, this is, Howie Roseman was talking about this. He seemed to be emphatic. They're going to lose players. They're going to get comp picks for next year, and this is a guy. Now, when I remember when Big V got that, I remember when I got the contract terms, it was $10 million a year. My hair was on fire when Big V got that deal. I couldn't believe it. So, look, if you look at the landscape, right, at left tackle, if Orlando Brown stays with Kansas City, I'm looking at the landscape here. There are a bunch of right tackles. I'm not seeing any left tackles out there. There are like 20 right tackles out there, Mike. Mike McGlinchey's a right tackle. Caleb McGarry is a right tackle. Isaiah Wynn is a 6'3" left tackle, play right or left tackle or guard. I don't think that's a big deal. Terrence Steele's a right tackle. He tried left, it didn't work. Juwan Taylor's a right tackle. George Fan can play both. He's had knee injuries in his career. No, funny, Mike, you mentioned this. I think he can get a decent deal. And remember, he didn't take a lot of snaps at guard, but he did work in at guard. He took some snaps there, and we had reported back in the spring they're probably going to do this, and they did it. And of course, it took them 6 months to do it, but they did it. And, yeah, maybe he shocks us. It gets an $8 to $10 million deal. Who knows?
I definitely think a team is going to target bringing him in to start at left tackle. I mean, we see how bad the offensive line play is in this league, and I think Dillard, and then we could talk about Sayamala here too. I would imagine someone is going to say, we got to get that guy here and pay him, and Sayamala is going to make a big amount of money.
Well, all right, so let's go to – now, don't forget he could play center. Now, Mosher had a really good nugget on Monday. He spoke to one AFC team, I think it was, that had Sayamala as their top interior lineman. That means guard center. Now, let me give you the top center guards here. Connor McGovern, who signed a big deal with the Jets. He never lived up to it. Had some injuries. Garrett Bradbury, who's an undersized former first-round pick center. Rodney Hudson, who's older. I don't know. He's going to make a lot of money. Jake Brendel, who's sort of an underrated. His brother's with the Vikings. It's sort of a journeyman at 30, but an underrated center. But Sayamala's a better football player. Bradley Bozeman, who I'm told was asking for $10 million a year from the Panthers. He got 1 year and like $4 million. Did a nice job, but Sayamala's a better football player. When you go to guards, Dalton Reisner, now he's a good player. He might get paid. Nate Davis from the Titans was a good player, undersized, about 280 pounds. The rest of them are just veterans. Roger Saffold on the back nine of his career. Justin Pugh from this area on the back nine of his career. Ben Powers is not a bad player. Sayamala's better. So you know what? Sayamala's going to get paid. Now here's the one thing with Isaac. Good player. He's what I call on the rung below Pro Bowl, but he's had a big injury history, and that's one thing you got to look at, Mike.
Yeah, it would be funny if a team said, we're going to bring both those guys here. We'll get Dillard and Sayamala. We got to get not only the two players, but we got to find out what those guys are teaching them over in Philadelphia there, right?
That would be funny. I mentioned this with Mosher on our show yesterday. I wonder if Roy Istvan, who's their assistant O-line coach, a Stoutland disciple, because you see, look, some of these guys were plucked on the defense. We know that Nick Rallis was plucked, obviously to go with Gannon to be his defense coordinator. So you do wonder, why isn't anyone talking to Roy Istvan just to interview him?
Sure, absolutely. Last guy on offense who's a free agent, and I guess he controls his own destiny here. He's not going to go play someplace else, but that would be Jason Kelce.
Yeah, I noted that last year. Our understanding was Kelce would either play for the Eagles or go nowhere else. He was highest paid center in football last year, over $14 million. We talked to Ed Kelce at the Super Bowl. Ed said Jason had not decided. We talked to another source close to him. It's going to take a little bit of time. Now, we'll let you know this, Mike. Though it never got reported, we know for a fact the deal was done verbally for Kelce to come back at the Combine. So it would not shock me next week if he's coming back that he gets that deal done and they just wait to announce it. Eagles like to wait. Eagles are funny. Like sometimes they just wait. They want stuff to be announced on their own when legends resign and all that. That's fine. But here's the thing, though. Before we get out of here, Mike, if Kelce does return and they walk away from Isaac Sayamala, then obviously Cam Jurgens should be Isaac's replacement. And I know he worked in practice to do it, but that would worry me a little bit because Jurgens, remember, Mike, has only played offensive line. He only played center for 2 years. He was a tight end before that. So you don't want to rush Jurgens in there. They'll know if he's ready or not.
Well, and if Kelce leaves and Sayamala leaves, now you got to replace 2/5 of your offensive line. That would be 2 new starters on the line.
Sure, and you got to look at that, and we'll talk more about this, Mike, in the coming week for the draft, because we turn our attention to the draft after the first week of free agency. It's all draft because the free agency in the NFL is completely different than the NBA. It's not as it's very intense for 2 days and it's dead. So we'll look toward the draft. And by the way, we should note this: tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. Eastern, the Intel with Greg Cosell. We go over free agent corners because the Eagles will be in the market for one, where they bring Bradbury back or not, and we go over about 12 to 14 of them. Mostly outside corners, a couple slots, so listen to that. It's going to be a fun one.
Very good. And real quick, while we have Adam here, we know the Eagles talked to 2 more defensive coordinators, really off the radar, guys. It seems like they have a pretty wide net. Shula and Minter, wide net. They're searching for a new coordinator here.
Shula, I don't know who's connected to him, but I'd heard he interviewed earlier this week or over the weekend. And we know that Vance Joseph is a guy they want to talk to, who's on their list. Now, he's been waiting to find out about Denver, we're told, by source close to him. Yeah, now they're very high on Denard Wilson. I could tell you he's probably got the best shot of everyone, but they want to go through the process. And we'll see, but they love Denard Wilson. I'm interested to see what happens here. And we noted a couple weeks ago that Brian Johnson's going to be the OC, and then Sirianni said he didn't want to say it's Brian Johnson. But how about, again, Brian Johnson will be the play caller. I'm not surprised, not big on that. And I'm interested to see what the hierarchy is, to how many guys are involved in getting the game plan together. We'll have more about that in the spring, but Brian Johnson's the guy who's going to overlook the offense.
All right, Adam Caplan here on the Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN. And don't forget the Inside the Birds podcast all season long. The Intel, check out all of their shows on the Inside the Birds platform. And then tomorrow, Mosher's back with more on the Eagles offseason. Thanks, bud.
Okay.
All right, there's Adam Caplan here on the Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN, the 97.3 ESPN free mobile app.